The sun hung low in the sky, casting an orange glow over the crowded street. Vendors packed up their stalls, their weary faces reflecting the exhaustion of a long day's work. Among them was Lena, a woman in her late 20s, her hands rough from years of labor. She worked at a small food cart, selling homemade empanadas to passers-by. It wasn't much, but it was honest work, and it was all she had. Lena wiped sweat from her forehead and counted the day's earnings. The thin wad of bills in her hand was barely enough to cover her rent, but she had to make it stretch. Rent was due tomorrow, and she still needed to buy medicine for her younger brother, whose fever hadn't broken in days. Every penny mattered. Not far from her, Marcus leaned against a lamppost, eyes scanning the street. He was in his early 30s, dressed in a worn-out hoodie and scuffed sneakers. A lifetime of bad choices had led him here. Penniless, desperate, and always looking for an easy way out. He had spent the last of his money on a losing bet, and now he needed cash fast. His gaze locked onto Lena. She was distracted, counting her money with a tired expression. His fingers twitched at his sides. It was just a quick grab, nothing personal. She'd make more money tomorrow. Marcus took a slow step forward, his heartbeat steady. He had done this before, too many times to count. He moved closer, pretending to glance at the food cart. Lena barely noticed him. She was focused on making sure every bill was there, counting under her breath. Then, in a flash, Marcus snatched the money from her hands. Lena gasped. "Hey, no!" But he was already running, pushing past people, weaving through the crowd like a shadow. Lena chased after him, her tired legs burning with effort. "Stop! Somebody stop him!" she screamed. A few heads turned, but no one reacted quickly enough. Marcus was already disappearing into an alleyway. She stopped, panting, her chest rising and falling with exhaustion. Tears stung her eyes as she gripped the empty space where her money had been. That was everything she had. Her rent, her brother's medicine. Gone in an instant. Marcus didn't look back. He clutched the stolen cash, stuffing it into his pocket as he disappeared into the night. It wasn't the first time he had taken from someone, and in his mind, it wouldn't be the last. What he didn't know was that fate had other plans. Marcus strolled through the darkened streets, his pockets lined with stolen cash and his conscience as light as the wind. He had done this before, too many times to count, and to him, it was just another night, another easy score. He didn't think about Lena's devastated expression or the way her voice cracked when she begged for help. To him, it was just survival. With money in hand, he headed straight to the nearest bar, the neon sign flickering above the entrance. He ordered a drink, then another, carelessly tossing bills onto the counter as if they had been rightfully earned. He gambled a few rounds of cards, certain that luck was finally on his side. For the first time in days, he felt in control. But luck is fickle, and karma never forgets. By midnight, Marcus was nearly broke. His winnings had turned into losses, and the so-called friends who drank with him had vanished the moment the money dried up. Worse, a man he owed from a past gambling debt spotted him and wasn't in the mood for excuses. "You think I forgot about what you owe me?" the man growled, shoving Marcus against a brick wall in a narrow alley. Marcus barely had time to react before fists flew. He fought back, but hunger and exhaustion had weakened him. When they finally left him, bruised and bleeding, the last of his stolen cash was gone. For the first time in years, panic set in. He had nothing, no money, no place to go. Over the next few days, Marcus searched for work. He tried construction sites, dishwashing in restaurants, even janitorial positions, but his past followed him like a shadow. A few employers recognized him. Others simply turned him away when they saw his desperation. "A guy like you?" one manager sneered. "I don't need trouble." The rejection stung, but the hunger was worse. Without money, food became a luxury he couldn't afford. He slept in abandoned buildings, shivering as the cold gnawed at his bones. He dug through trash bins behind restaurants, his pride long gone. One night, as he sat curled up in a doorway, stomach empty and body aching, he thought about Lena. He had stolen from her without a second thought, and now he knew how it felt to be powerless, to have nothing. Was this karma? Marcus let out a bitter laugh. He had spent his life taking from others, believing the world owed him something. But now the world had taken from him, leaving him with nothing but regret. And then fate took its next turn. Marcus had reached his breaking point. Hunger gnawed at him, his body ached from sleeping on the cold pavement, and every attempt to find work had ended in rejection. He had run out of places to go, out of options. But then, as if fate was playing a cruel joke on him, he spotted a help-wanted sign in the window of a newly opened cafe. The place looked brand new, clean glass windows, warm lighting, and the scent of fresh bread drifting from inside. Desperation drowned out any hesitation. He stepped inside. A young woman at the counter greeted him with a smile. "You hear about the job?" "Yeah," Marcus mumbled, glancing around. The place was small but lively, filled with the hum of conversation and clinking dishes. The woman handed him an application. "The owner's in the back. She'll be out soon." Marcus nodded, filling out the form with unsteady hands. His heart pounded as he waited. He wasn't expecting much, just a chance. Then he heard a familiar voice. "Who's the applicant?" His breath caught in his throat as Lena stepped into view. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. She looked different, stronger, more confident, no longer the exhausted street vendor he had stolen from. She wore a simple but neat uniform, her dark hair tied back, a sharp determination in her eyes. She wasn't struggling anymore. She was the owner. His hands clenched into fists. Of all the places, of all the people. Lena's gaze flickered toward him, and for a moment, her expression was unreadable. Did she recognize him? Did she remember the night he had robbed her? Marcus swallowed hard, forcing himself to remain still. If she recognized him, she would throw him out. Worse, she could call the police. But instead of anger, she said nothing. Lena took the application from his hands, scanning it quickly. "Ever worked in a cafe before?" Marcus shook his head. "No, but I can learn." She studied him for a moment, then let out a small sigh. "We start early. You willing to be here by 5 a.m.? He blinked. "You're giving me a chance?" Lena raised an eyebrow. "Do you want the job or not?" Marcus didn't hesitate. "Yes, I do." She nodded. "Then be here tomorrow morning. Don't be late." As she walked away, Marcus let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. She had seen him. She had recognized him. And yet, she had chosen not to say anything. For the first time in a long while, Marcus felt something stir inside him, something unfamiliar. Maybe this was his chance to make things right. The next morning, Marcus arrived at the cafe just before dawn, half expecting to find the doors locked or to be turned away the moment Lena saw him again. But to his surprise, the place was already open. The smell of freshly brewed coffee and warm pastries filled the air as he stepped inside. Lena stood behind the counter, rolling up her sleeves. She barely glanced at him before handing him an apron. "You'll start with dishes and cleaning tables," she said, her tone businesslike. "Then we'll see if you're worth keeping." Marcus nodded, slipping the apron over his head. He didn't argue. He didn't push back. For the first time in years, he was willing to work for something. At first, the job was overwhelming. He wasn't used to the structure, the routine, or the patience it required. His old habits, cutting corners, taking the easy way out, kept creeping in. But Lena never yelled, never belittled him. If he made a mistake, she corrected him, then expected him to do better. Her kindness confused him. Why wasn't she treating him with the same cruelty he had once shown her? Why wasn't she using this job to make him suffer? One afternoon, after closing, Marcus stayed behind to mop the floors. Lena was counting the day's earnings at the register, just like that night when he had stolen from her. The memory made his stomach twist. After a long silence, she spoke without looking up. "I know it was you." Marcus froze, gripping the mop handle tightly. Lena finally lifted her gaze, her expression unreadable. "That night, you stole from me." His mouth went dry. She had known this whole time. For a moment he considered lying, making up an excuse. But what was the point? He had already come this far. He swallowed hard. "Yeah," he admitted. "It was me." Lena sighed, shaking her head. "I figured." Marcus braced himself for the inevitable, the shouting, the accusations, the demand that he get out. But instead, Lena leaned back against the counter. "Do you know why I didn't turn you in?" He shook his head. "Because I knew what it felt like," she said simply. "To be desperate. To feel like the world was against you. I knew that no matter how angry I was, it wouldn't change anything." Marcus stared at her, struggling to find words. "You needed a second chance," Lena continued. "And whether you waste it or not, that's up to you." Marcus looked down, shame creeping into his chest. He had spent so much of his life taking from others, assuming no one would ever help him. Yet here she was, the woman he had wronged, giving him a chance he didn't deserve. And for the first time in his life, he wanted to be worthy of it. For a long moment after Lena's words, Marcus couldn't speak. The weight of his guilt settled deep in his chest, heavier than he had ever allowed himself to feel before. He had spent so much of his life making excuses, blaming the world, blaming others, but here was a woman he had stolen from, a woman who had every right to hate him, and instead, she had given him kindness. His throat tightened. I'm sorry," he finally said, his voice hoarse. Lena tilted her head, watching him carefully. "I really am," he continued, his hands tightening into fists. "That night, I didn't think. I was desperate, but that doesn't make it right. I hurt you, and I took something that wasn't mine. And you still gave me a job. You didn't have to do that." Lena exhaled softly. "No, I didn't." "I want to make it right." His voice was firm now, steadier. "Let me pay you back, every cent. I don't care how long it takes." A flicker of something, understanding, maybe even approval, passed over her face. "Money isn't the only way to pay someone back, Marcus." He frowned. "What do you mean?" She leaned on the counter, arms crossed. "You can start by proving that you're not the same man who stole from me. You can start by doing the work, by showing up every day and making something of yourself." Marcus swallowed hard and nodded. "I will." And he meant it. From that moment on, Marcus threw himself into the job. He arrived early and stayed late. He scrubbed the floors until they shined, washed dishes without complaint, and memorized every detail of the menu. He learned how to make perfect espresso shots and took pride in crafting lattes with steady hands. The customers noticed. Lena noticed. At first, she watched him closely, as if waiting for him to slip up, to fall back into old habits. But he didn't. Slowly, the walls between them began to crumble. They talked. About business, about life, even about their past struggles. Months passed, and soon, Marcus wasn't just an employee. He was part of the cafe. Lena began trusting him with more responsibilities, handling inventory, taking care of the register, even training new hires. And then, one day, she did something that stunned him. She handed him the keys. "You've earned this," she said simply. "I need someone I can trust to help run this place. And I trust you." Marcus took the keys, his hands shaking slightly. Trust. It was something he had never been given before. He had spent so much of his life running, stealing, surviving. But here, in this little cafe, he had finally built something real. And for the first time, he was proud of the man he had become. The morning sun cast a golden glow over the cafe as Marcus flipped the sign to open and unlocked the doors. The once foreign routine had become second nature to him. The smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, mixing with the soft hum of the city waking up. He had come a long way from the man who once lurked in the shadows, searching for an easy score. Lena sat at a corner table, sipping her coffee and going through paperwork. She glanced up as Marcus moved behind the counter, greeting customers with a smile. A knowing look passed between them, unspoken but understood. He had earned his place here. The cafe had become more than just a job to him. It was his home. Lena had given him a second chance when no one else would, and he had worked hard to prove himself worthy of it. Now, he was managing the business, ensuring things ran smoothly when Lena was away. The once struggling woman had not only turned her life around, but had helped him do the same. As the morning rush settled, Marcus stepped outside for a break. That's when he spotted a young man, barely in his 20s, lingering near the alley. His clothes were ragged, his face thin from hunger, and his hands twitched the way Marcus's once had. Marcus knew that look. Desperation. He took a deep breath, then stepped toward the man. "You hungry?" Marcus asked, his voice calm, even welcoming. The young man hesitated, eyes darting around as if expecting a trick. I don't have any money." Marcus shrugged. "I didn't ask if you had money. I asked if you were hungry." The young man nodded cautiously. "Come inside," Marcus said, nodding toward the cafe. "Eat first, then we'll talk." The man followed him in, wary but drawn by the warmth inside. Marcus set a plate of food in front of him, just as Lena had once given him a chance when he least deserved it. Lena, watching from her seat, smiled slightly. She knew exactly what Marcus was doing. The cycle had come full circle. Once, Marcus had been the one stealing from people like Lena, believing the world owed him something. But now, he was standing in her place, offering a helping hand instead of taking what wasn't his. And that was what true redemption looked like. As the cafe bustled around him, Marcus sat across from the young man and said the same words Lena had once told him. "Do you want a second chance?" Because now he understood. One act of kindness could change a life forever.